Okay, I'm gonna try to talk loudly, and we'll see if that works. If you can't hear me, just let me know. I think usually I have a pretty loud voice. So thank you so much. Believe half of what he said. I'm not like not that impressive. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm so happy to have been able to come to KAIST and speak to all of y'all. It's been a great trip. This is my first time in South Korea actually, and it's been really cool. So. Thank you again for having me, and thanks for taking the time out of your day on this Thursday to come to my talk. So what I'm going to start with is, and hopefully maybe for some of y'all who are already familiar with advanced air mobility, this motivation is not really needed. So I think right now there's a lot of money and a lot of hype and a lot of interest in urban air mobility and advanced air mobility and using drones for passenger air taxi and drone package delivery, right? So this is just a collection of random clips that I found one day on the news, right? So there's a lot of excitement, a lot of attention in this field, which is good, especially for me as a researcher, and plenty of different sorts of services. So services that we may use on a daily basis, air taxi, shuttle to the airport from the downtown core, as well as more specialized services, right? So air ambulances, business flights, and so on. So lots of intriguing use cases. Again, it's a very popular field right now, but I'm gonna throw some cold water over this and talk about some of the issues, right? So this is the vision, right? This is the high-level vision of where we would like to be for advanced air mobility. But now let me show you a whole different section of clippings that I found just randomly on the news, and we see some very dramatic safety issues when it comes to these services, right? Collisions with other things that fly, collisions with walls, collisions with airplanes and so on, right? So there's obviously a very intriguing and critical safety issue that needs to be mitigated if we want this service to become reality, right? So safety in terms of collision risks, in terms of not having your vehicle crash, in terms of not endangering passengers or goods. But of course, it's not just safety, it's also this very new way to think about demand, right? So if you think about traditional airlines, take Korean Air, take Delta Airlines, the schedules are often determined months out in advance, right? Years out in advance even. But then when you think about this advanced air mobility, right? If you want your packages delivered in 30 minutes, if you want to get an Uber, air taxi to the airport, you don't have structured demand information as you might do in the commercial air transportation case, right? So here, what was our issue? Our issue was safety. Here, what is our issue? Our issue is traffic management, right? So congestion management, balancing between demand and capacity is not trivial, and it's not easily translatable from the air transportation case. The third thing that I want to touch on is this issue of privacy. Now, I'm going to save this one to the end because I'll dedicate quite a large chunk of my talk to this privacy issue. Some of you may have heard of privacy in terms of drones from the perspective of like the drones has a camera maybe on the bottom and maybe it sees something it wasn't supposed to see. Yes, that is a big issue. I'm actually going to talk about a different perspective of privacy, but I'll kind of tease that for now and then save that to the end. So the way that I like to think about these different barriers, right? There are multiple different barriers between where we are today to full implementation of advanced air mobility. And I think this team from Mike Patterson at NASA, they wrote a very nice concept paper in AAA SciTech a couple years ago, where they classified these barriers into 5 different categories, ranging from the aircraft itself, how do you build the sensors, how do you design the controllers for the aircraft, etc., to how do you actually manage and operate an aircraft, how do you manage and operate a fleet of aircraft, how do you manage and operate a fleet of aircraft within the airspace, and then finally, you're trying to bring the system into an existing city or an existing metropolitan area. So how do you get people to accept this new system, right? So how do you actually integrate the system into society and get them to accept it? My talk is going to go through every one of these barriers except for the first one. So I will not be focusing on how do you design the the vehicle? How do you, build the wings or develop the optimal controller for navigation? How do you do GPS denied navigation? I will not be talking about that first pillar, but these other pillars I will be talking about, and I'll sort of map them to the three topics that I will go over. So the presentation outline for today, the first part, we're going to talk about trajectory planning, right? So you want to go from A to B, you don't want to crash, you don't want to crash into other things, you want to make sure you complete the mission on time. How do you generate a kinematically feasible trajectory to get you from A to B, right? That's part number one. I won't spend too much time on this. I'll kind of give you a high-level overview and then throw you a paper reference. And you're more than welcome to reference the paper and let me know if you have any questions offline. So I'll spend not too much time on this with respect to trajectory planning, which of course deals with safety. Then we'll zoom out a little bit. Okay, we'll zoom out and think about the system from the traffic management perspective. So no longer am I interested in planning the trajectory for an individual vehicle. I'm now interested in thinking about what is the capacity of my airspace, what are the demands, trying to access that capacity, and how do I run optimization problems that strategically delay aircraft such that the capacity is not exceeded in my airspace. Okay, so I'll talk about this, also not for too long, because I really want to save time for this third part, which I think, at least personally, is a very, very fascinating question because this privacy risk stems from a very important safety critical system, remote identification. I'll talk about what that is when we get to this part. So this, in my opinion, is one of the more interesting and insidious questions because it's not like this privacy issue came out purposefully, right? It was, you designed this piece of technology for a safety critical task, but then one of the unintended side effects is this privacy implication. And how do we mitigate, how do we model this privacy implication is really what I'm going to spend a big chunk of my time talking about in this third part. Okay, so going back to part one. So we'll start on part one, which is really thinking about the trajectory planning problem. And the way that this fits into all the barriers is it's how do you operate an individual aircraft and how do you operate a fleet of aircraft given missions and given specifications and given constraints. Again, I'm going to sort of go over this at a high level, but definitely want to acknowledge my collaborators on this project first. So this was done with a group out of the University of Pennsylvania, as well as 2 faculty members, one at the University of Waterloo in Canada and one at Oregon State. Broadly, drone, goal, right? And you have some safety constraints, geofences that you can't go into. You want to maintain minimum separation. You want to complete your mission in some duration of time, and so on. So you have constraints, you have some mission specifications, which you can say, in a sentence quite easily. I want you to finish this mission in X amount of time. I want you to always remain clear of another aircraft for the entire duration of the mission. It's very easy for me to say those as English statements, whereas statements, how do I actually bake them into the trajectory planning problem, which is actually a nonlinear optimization. Okay. So the way that we went about this is using this construct called signal temporal logic, or STL. So STL is a concept from cyber-physical systems, which is a way to translate a statement like always in an interval of time, so for some duration of time, don't crash. You can write it as a logical formula that says the position of my drone for every time within some time interval must be out of the unsafe zone, right? So this is inclusive in the unsafe zone with a negation operator, right? So you can kind of chain these things together. And you can chain multiple ones together, right? So I can, of course, ask the drone number 2 to stay outside of the unsafe zone as well, and also to maintain some safety separation of delta between the 2 drones for all time. This is one master specification. I'll call it Phi 1. And we can chain multiple master specifications together and use that as the objective. So we can actually say, okay, find me a kinematically feasible trajectory such that I maximize the probability of, not probability, such that I maximize the satisfaction of my specification. This is a logical formula. This evaluates the true or false, right? So either you satisfy it or you don't satisfy it. We relaxed it a little bit, so we actually turned it from a binary true, false to actually a continuous satisfaction. And now with the continuous satisfaction, which requires some nice, Lipschitz continuity, etc. conditions on it, you can optimize on that, right? It becomes an objective function that you can actually try to find gradients on and try to take maximums and whatnot. So with that's the good part of this problem, is that we can actually try to maximize this robustness, and in order to derive the sequence of control inputs, which of course translates to thrust inputs for this particular drone. A sequence of control inputs that gets you from P0 to P3, which satisfy some robustness criteria. Right? So why are we doing all this? Why are we casting it in this STL form? It turns out that if you do write these specifications in STL, there's a really nice translation between STL and constraints in a mixed integer linear program. And we're able to actually now work with problems of geographic and timescales that state-of-the-art solutions could not handle. So I'll show you a little bit of our results. But this paper that I'm showing you here in TRC has all the details that I'm skipping over in this part. So I encourage you, if you're interested in this, to reference it. But what we looked at is we looked at Philadelphia International Airport, and we came up with a couple of use cases. We had like an air shuttle between the terminals. We had a shuttle from an off-site location to the airport. We had a package delivery drone from the airport cargo city to industrial facility off-site. So we have heterogeneous missions, and we have heterogeneous UAS, where drones serving these missions. And this was our workflow, which we call FADS, which is Framework for Autonomous Drone Safety. I should really remember that. But anyways, so this is our workflow where we have some mission description, we translate it into STL, we have a master specification which we build into the trajectory planning, and this low-level trajectory planning problem spits us out the control input, which is then given to each UAS. I want to be very specific about this. This is an offline planner, right? So we do this once, given the mission, and we provide it to the UAS, and we say we're going to just upper bound all uncertainty that you could possibly encounter via this maximizing the robustness of the satisfaction of your constraints, right? Of course, you can. This should be coupled with an onboard online controller as well to actually kind of couple the system from beginning to end. Right? This is the slide I want to end on for this part, which is, so these two columns here, blue STL, this is state-of-the-art generating trajectories for our rural and urban case with quite a large time horizon. They're actually not able to give you solutions at all, so they'll time out before they actually produce trajectories that are flyable. It takes us 2 minutes for the rural case and quite a decent amount of time, but we were okay with this because this is an offline planner, right? So we said, okay, as long as you give me some optimized trajectory, that's okay. We'll take it. And this robustness parameter, the way to think about this is if you have a trajectory, just blow up a little tube around your trajectory, and any perturbations within that tube, you're still able to satisfy your mission, right? So if this robustness is 0, then what that means is if you got anything slightly wrong, if you misspecified the dynamics model, if you forgot to take into account wind, anything, you'll fail the mission, right? Maybe you'll crash into some no-fly zone where you'll crash into a drone. This is saying you have a little bit of buffer in your specifications. Right? Okay, so again, that was like a 5-minute overview of this paper. Encourage you to go look at it if you're interested in safety from the trajectory planning perspective for AAs. Okay, so now we're going to zoom out. We're going to zoom out to the traffic flow management level, where again, I'm no longer interested in individual trajectories. I'm interested to say this airspace can handle X aircraft per hour. I have Y aircraft demand trying to use this airspace. How do I juggle these two, right? But we put a little bit of a decentralization spin on it. What do I mean by that? Let me first so pillars, this is where they fit in. This is how do you manage and design the airspace? How do you manage and design a fleet of drones trying to access the airspace, right? So this is where, these are the pillars that the second part of the talk fits into in NASA's vision of AAM. And this was done with, so Chris is a PhD candidate right now at MIT, and Yash is at Waterloo. Okay, so this is the centralized traffic management problem. You have a bunch of drone operators trying to use a piece of the airspace, and all the literature up to this point assumes that there is one controller. It's called a USS service supplier, but for all intents and purposes, you can think of them as an air traffic controller for the airspace. So all the literature to this point assumes a central controller that knows everything that you need to know about this piece of the airspace. And of course, because there's just one controller, this controller has access to all the trajectory information, has access to all the infeasibilities, all the feasibilities, all the constraints, all the capacities, and so on, and all the demands. The reality is, it's going to be something more like this. So if you read any of NASA's concept of operations or any of the advanced air mobility maturation levels, you'll see that this, as soon as you get to the stage where you're trying to handle hundreds to thousands of operations, you start seeing this word of federated ATM pop in. You're like, what's federated ATM? Federated ATM is basically decentralized air traffic management and air traffic control, right? So the vision is that you have private-public partnerships where the government dictates standardization and regulation for the airspace, but then it's up to private companies, USS 1, USS 2, USS 3, and each of them manage different parts of the airspace. These are private corporations. There's no reason they need necessarily to share information, right? So now the question is, okay, here doing traffic flow management, somewhat straightforward. How do you do it here when there's not necessarily full information visibility across my boundaries? So to kind of introduce this problem setting a little bit, I'm going to give you this very simplified map of the San Francisco Bay Area, divided into 5 different regions, where each region, R1 through R5, is controlled by USS 1 through USS 5. And then furthermore, there might be further subdivisions within the region as sectors. This is very similar to how the commercial airspace today is set up. You have some high-level area control center, and then there's hierarchies of high, low, en route sectors, and there's terminal airspace, and so on. So there's this division, right? So we're kind of envisioning similar divisions for the UAM airspace. Now let's say you're trying to get from this vertiport, vertical takeoff and landing port, to this vertiport over here, and this is the flight path that was planned for you. Notice that you go through 3 distinct USS to get from your origin to your destination. So before I set up our heuristic solution, what are some of the constraints in this problem? Well, the first one is arrival and departure capacity constraints, right? So at my vertiport, for some unit of time, it can handle 12 departures per hour and 24 arrivals per hour, right? So that's my first set of constraints that I have, is just the arrival and departure capacities at my vertiport. I have en route sector constraints as well, right? So when you're en route for each sector, there's a limit to how many aircraft can safely fit in there, right? Again, this is the strategic level. At the tactical level, you're doing, trajectory resolution and conflict resolution, but here you're trying to make sure that those conflicts don't pop up in the first place, right? You're trying to do some strategic demand and capacity balancing. What are some other constraints that we have? Well, maybe you can't arrive or depart past a certain time, right? So there's a feasible set of departure and arrival times. Why might this be important? Maybe this aircraft is connecting at that vertiport, right? So you can't arrive after the departure time of your connection, right? So there needs to be some feasible sets of arrival and departure times. Travel time constraints, you can't teleport in a sector, right? So if the sector takes 5 minutes to traverse, then my optimization solution should not give me a solution where the time to go from one sector to go through one sector is less than 5 minutes, right? And then, of course, your vehicle might have some endurance on it. So if you think of any of these electric vertical takeoff and landing vehicles, they're probably going to be range limited to 30, 40 minutes of flying time. So endurance constraints, you don't want to run out of battery right here, right? That'll be problematic. And then finally, integrality constraints. This is a bit more of a optimization thing, but basically, if you tell me that you're going to be here at time t, you cannot split yourself and say 0.6 of me is going to be here and 0.4 of me is going to be here, right? So these are all binary programs, right? So all the decisions here are 0 or 1. You're either here in the sector or you're not. Okay, so this is kind of the basic structure of the optimization problem. The difficulty here is that R4, this is all the trajectory information it sees. For all it cares, an aircraft took off here and it landed here. That's all it cares about. For R3, all it cares about is an aircraft took off here and it landed here. And for what is this? R2, it took off here and it lands here. Right? So you have this disjoint set of information, and we assume that this R2 will not tell this what the trajectory information is. So each USS is trying to solve a local UAS traffic management just within itself. It needs to somehow broadcast its set of constraints and infeasibilities to each other, right? So how do we do that, right? So each one, you can think of it as a traffic flow management subproblem, and then there's a master problem that needs to iterate through all of these regions and in some intelligent manner pass constraints and feasibilities back and forth. Right? Okay, so yet again, I'm going to cut this short, and I'm going to refer you to the paper. But basically, the structure of the solution is a heuristic where what we're doing is we first start at some region, and we solve iteratively across regions, passing a well-selected set of infeasibilities back into the appropriate regions that we need to coordinate with. If any of you are looking for an interesting problem, we know that this heuristic is really bad. So like in the paper, we talk about all the ways that this heuristic could be improved. In fact, in our results, you can see the inefficiencies, because what sometimes will happen is that this heuristic will get all the way to like NR minus 1, and then it has to go all the way back and backtrack and solve. So there's a lot of backtracking that we see in this heuristic, which immediately tells us this is not the best heuristic you can use. Just by intelligently picking which region to start, like maybe if you have a region that's surrounded by a lot of other regions, you should deconflict that region first because there's so many coordination happening. We have a very naive sequence. We just say start at R1. Right? Again, very naive heuristic. We know there's a lot of improvements that are possible, but this is the first piece of work that I've seen where you don't assume full information sharing within your distributed air traffic management units for the urban airspace. Okay, so again, kind of I feel like I'm like teasing with the problem, but like read the paper. Anyways, so that's really part 2. Okay, what I'm going to spend the bulk of the next 30-ish minutes on is really this problem of community acceptance and community integration, which again, I think is a really, really insidious problem because no one set out to construct a system that has privacy issues in it, right? It's that this privacy issue was a consequence of something that no one really thought about. So, okay, well, no one thought about it. How do we correct it? We can't get rid of the system. I'm already telling you the system is safety critical, and I'll motivate why. And I'll tell you what this system that I'm referring to in abstraction is. But, I'll talk a little bit about how this privacy implication can sometimes arise from very, very benign intentions, right, of safety. Okay, so this really fits into pillar 5, which is, well, it's the last pillar I haven't tackled, but it's also this pillar of community acceptance and integration. Okay, and this is joint work with Karthik, he's a postdoc currently at Stanford, and a group out of MIT where my former advisor, that's Professor Hamsa Balakrishnan. So this is an ongoing collaboration that we are continuing to work on. very fruitfully, although we always welcome new perspectives and thoughts, which is why I'm trying to propagate this particular piece of research. So, good. What I'm going to start with is just the background and motivation of what I mean when I keep saying this privacy risk. We know drone delivery is coming. I'm not going to belabor this point, but basically lots of people want to deliver lots of different things using drones. Pizzas, groceries, coffees from Starbucks. More importantly, like blood donations and organs and medicine, right? So lots of different use cases. Some, in my opinion, are better than others. I won't tell you which ones, but there's a lot out there, right, of what people are trying to do. Good. Now, if there's going to be a million of these things flying in my sky, I want there to be some sort of rules for them, right? And thankfully, the US government, and also many other governments in the world as well, have come up with these regulations referred to as remote identification or remote ID standards. The way to think about them is when you fly in an airplane, air traffic controllers can see you because they have access to your radar information, they have access to Mode S information, right? So this you can think of as radar and air traffic control for drones. Every drone in the US, and also in other parts of the world, will need to be equipped with remote ID broadcast. And what that means is this drone needs to publicly broadcast its location and its ID. Why? Well, one, for collision avoidance, but two, if the drone is in some sensitive airspace, maybe above a park or above a school or above a national monument or something, you want to know when it's violating a no-fly zone so that you can track it back to its owner and levy the appropriate punishments. So this is actually already coded up in the federal regulations in the United States. As you might imagine with anything that's already coded up as federal regulation, people have already tried to sue in terms of saying that this regulation violates their privacy. This was very interesting to me, not because it's the exact privacy issue that we're dealing with, but basically in this lawsuit, some guy, Tyler, argued that this remote ID is a violation of my privacy because now the government can seize my property, right? They can find my drone and they can take my drone. And this was unanimously denied. So this lawsuit was not successful. The judges ruled that drones are useful, drones are coming, but they pose safety risks. And the whole point of the FAA is to develop standards and regulation to prevent and mitigate those safety risks. So your court case is rejected, and this remote ID is here to stay. Right. Now, okay, it's here to stay. You can't move it. Safety critical, right? It's a safety critical system in order to enable advanced air mobility. Now, imagine maybe one of you guys, you're an entrepreneurial bunch, and you say, these drones are broadcasting these trajectories publicly. Let me go to the middle of Seoul, let me set up some Bluetooth Wi-Fi receivers, and let me collect some trajectories. Why? I don't know. But let me just do that. I can't. They're publicly broadcasted. Okay? Now, the big issue that I'm going to define very formally in terms of privacy later is you may be able to map who ordered what from whom by looking at these trajectories, right? So imagine me today, this is me with much shorter hair. Imagine me and I order some food for delivery. This would be essentially equivalent to someone tying a giant balloon to the back of my delivery car and saying Max ordered fries from wherever restaurant he ordered fries from. Okay, fries, innocuous, maybe that's not a big deal, but now let's say I have some medical condition and I order drugs for delivery, prescribed drugs for delivery, and I don't want people knowing my medical condition, right? Maybe a drone company offers door-to-door delivery from a medical warehouse or a pharmacy that is known to stock that kind of drug. So now, in some cases, this might actually pose a personal safety to me as a risk. If this particular piece of personally identifiable information is released to the public. Maybe you weren't trying to collect trajectories to expose my privacy, but it is an unintended side effect of this, right? And of course, I think, especially in today's society, we're becoming more and more cognizant of privacy risks, both in the digital sphere, but also in the physical sphere. All of your phones right now are definitely tracking GPS locations, right? So there's sort of this shift towards thinking about privacy. Why might companies care? This is an interesting point. So let's say I'm Walmart and I offer drone delivery, and there's another company, Amazon, that also offers drone deliveries. Walmart could go to one of your new startups and say, hey, give me the trajectories of everyone who's gotten drone deliveries from Amazon's warehouse to their house. I'm going to now target my advertisement for my drone delivery service to those customers, right? So loss of competitive advantage and perhaps unwanted targeting, but also just more, from a higher level, if my consumers are like, wait, if I use your delivery service, people might find out I have a certain condition, or people might find out, something about my socioeconomic status, right? They're not going to want to order from you. So, anyways, there's also, you can go down this rabbit hole of thinking about risks, right? You order some delivery from an Apple store. Now people are like, oh, their net worth is probably reasonably high if they're ordering this thing. Let's say they keep seeing an order every time a new iPhone comes out, right? They're like, this person can afford it. Right? So there's all sorts of risks that you can think about in terms of this threat model here. Good. So the key problem here is who ordered what from whom, and when we as a research team got to this point, we're like, oh, this is really exciting. This is a really interesting problem. Then we got stuck because we're like, what are we supposed to do about this as engineers and as planners? How do we even think about this without at least a way to quantify it formally, at least without a way to quantify it mathematically, right? So I'm going to ask you to put on some mathematical hats for this Thursday afternoon and think a little bit about privacy risk. So in order to introduce this, I need to now pull in some notation. So I'm going to let little n be the number of customers. In this very simple example, I'm going to have 3 customers. I'm going to have big A be the set of addresses. So these are individual customer houses. Little m is going to be the number of vendors. In this case, there's 3 vendors. And big B is going to be the set of all vendors. So this is a super simple example. I have a vendor that sells an apple, that sells a ball, and it sells a pen. And I have customers that want a ball, an apple, a ball, and a pen. Okay, let's think about a delivery route. Let's say this delivery route, you pick up an apple, then you go and you pick up a ball, and then you go drop off the ball at this customer, and then you go and drop off you pick up a pen, you go and you drop off the pen, and then you go and drop off the apple. Right, that's the delivery route for this path. Now, let's go back to your startup. What does your startup see when they look at this from the trajectory perspective? You see a pickup from a vendor that you know sells an apple. This is all public information. That's fine. You see a pickup at a vendor that sells a ball. Now here it becomes interesting, right? You don't really know what gets dropped off. Something gets dropped off at this customer. And furthermore, you don't know what stayed on board either, right? Okay, then you keep observing, and you see that you picked up a pen, and then you see that something else was dropped off, but you don't know what stayed on board. And then you see something else get dropped off, and off you go. This is what you see. You're all smart students. So if your company says, hey, what is the best chance of guessing what was dropped off? What might be a reasonable solution? Well, a reasonable solution might be to appeal to conditional probabilities, right? You say, okay, well, I know I picked up an apple. I know I picked up the ball. Something was dropped off. One half chance of guessing. You pick up a pen. And now, you can do some conditional probability calculating. I won't embarrass myself because I won't be able to do this like on the spot. But anyways, you know that a ball and an apple was picked up, and you know something was dropped off. So you can compute the you can compute the distribution for these items that's seen on board. Again, if you want to practice some conditional probabilities, do this, verify this. My student said it was correct. I'm pretty sure that's correct. But anyways, so and it turns out that for this simple example, the distribution is the same. This is really good because now I have a mathematical object. In fact, I have a discrete probability distribution where more formally I have a probability mass function associated with every single customer in my route. Right? And what is that probability mass function? It is a probability mass function that assigns a probability to a discrete set of items in this delivery route. Okay, and as a reminder, this is what was actually dropped off. This person actually got a ball, this person got a pen, this person got an apple. So now we can go ahead and formally define privacy risk. I'm going to first define this probability distribution, PAI, associated with customer AI as a distribution that maps the vendor to the probability of it being received by that customer. And now the privacy risk for customer I is simply guessing the right item, or in other words, it's the mass given to the item that was actually ordered by that customer, right? So, more privacy means this number is smaller. You have a less chance of guessing. Worse privacy means it's a higher number. You have a better chance of guessing. Now, across the route, you can go ahead and define some related things very easily and nicely. You can define a worst case privacy, which is the customer that suffered the most privacy-wise on my route. And you can, of course, for this case, it's 1/2, right? That's the worst case privacy loss for this route. You can also, of course, define an average privacy risk, which is just, what's the average privacy risk across my route or across each customer. Okay, this is actually really critical, so I'm going to stop here for like a minute and ask if there's any questions on. Yeah.
Yeah, I was what if a vendor has multiple items that you can't say which one is collected as a picked up by did you?
Yeah, so I think that goes to the targeted advertising case, right? Like you could still, just the knowledge that it was from that vendor could subject you to advertising. This is a one-to-one model. So in our current paper, we assume very unrealistically that each vendor sells one item and it delivers that to one customer home. We're working on many-to-one, one-to-many, and many-to-many extensions, right? So you can extend this, certainly. Yeah. Good question, thank you. I mentioned that. Okay, good. Feel free to interrupt me if you have questions. So, okay, so I'm just going to quickly run through some analysis that I think are pretty easy to intuit. How do we get more privacy? Right? Remember, you can't. So, in usual privacy literature, you can add noise to the trajectories. You can't do that here. This is a safety critical system. If you add noise to this, you ruin the entire purpose of remote ID. So how do you increase privacy without doing that? Well, let me take you through this simple example. Let's say this is what you observe. You see V1, A1, V2, A2. This is blatantly non-private. You can guess immediately what everyone ordered. A1 ordered from V1, A2 ordered from V2. That's not that exciting. But if you just change your route, so assuming your drone has the privacy, has the capacity to hold 2 items, you would just go to the 2 vendors first before dropping it off, and you already get a 1/2 decrease in your privacy. Right? You can do no better than a 1/2 guess. And of course, you can keep extending this infinitely. If you have n items and you can hold n items in your capacity, then the best chance privacy risk is just 1/n. But now, okay, you're like, oh, this is great. I'm just going to have this drone go to 100 vendors, and then deliver 100 items, and I have a privacy risk that's 0.01, right? Now efficiency starts kicking in. Why is that necessarily the most efficient route for your drone? And it's probably not, right? So I'm going to walk through this relatively quickly, but basically, the moment you throw in geography, this is a very simple geographic setting. Unit geographies. In this topology, you can actually improve your privacy and efficiency. But if I just permute these two, V2 and A1, it turns out you can actually only optimize efficiency at the cost of privacy or vice versa. So this starts becoming very counterintuitive, right? It starts telling you that the moment you throw geography in here, the most private route is not necessarily the most efficient one anymore. So keep this in mind. And of course, let's say your drone can only hold up to C items. The worst case privacy can only be lower bounded by the maximum 1/n or 1/c, right? Because you can't hold more than C items at once. In the paper, we have like a kind of clever way to get rid of that capacity using decoy vendors. I won't go too much in here, given the time. Okay, so what I'll kind of end on is this geographic setting, where, remember, even in this very simple geography, I could only have efficiency or I can have privacy in some cases. In other cases, I can actually do better in both. So sorry, we don't have the font there, but we did a very simple case study where we looked at 6 different vendors and 6 different customers, and we assumed some kinematics for the drone. These are all parameters you can change however you want. So yeah, so we did a case study in Boston. I'm just going to show you one of the case studies. We then kind of switched up the topology a little bit of the delivery, so you can read more about that in the paper. Basically what we did is we took this set and we brute force generated all the routes. Immediately, people who know computational complexity will call me out and say this is factorial complexity now. Right? Actually, speaking of complexity, I should mention calculating privacy. So if I give you a route of length n, the algorithm for calculating the privacy is complexity O of n. So it's a linear time complexity to compute privacy. Awesome. It is definitely not linear time to compute all the possible routes. Right? Anyone who's looked at the traveling salesman problem, vehicle routing problem knows this is not an easy problem. Anyways, so we kind of got around and we said, okay, 6 vendors, we'll just brute force it for now. And we'll talk about what we do in that later. So, of course, what we're interested in is not all the solution. We're only interested in the Pareto frontiers of our solutions, where the Pareto frontiers are parts where I cannot improve my privacy without worsening my efficiency or vice versa. Right? And these different colors are different capacities. Sorry. Okay. So let's just look at the capacity 3 case. Let's look at a really efficient routing that is not very private. Yes. So what this route looks like is the following. I'll just let you admire it for a second. So the drone kind of does some pickups, goes over, does some deliveries, comes back, and so on. Okay. Privacy risk, 0.33. Average wait time for a delivery, 13 minutes. Keep kind of this in mind. Now let's think about the most private routing, and let's pay attention to what the route tries to do. So it zigzags back and forth across the river because it's trying to keep its capacity as full as it can to not let you guess easily what it dropped off. Right? But this is going to give you a lot of efficiency issues. Right? So, come back. So privacy, better. Wait time is worse. And of course, you can look at routes that are sort of in between the two as well. And they have some characteristics of both. And you can rank these from least private, most efficient, all the way to most efficient, least private. But we had to brute force and find all these routes first, which is not great. But first of all, geography matters a lot. Anyways, okay, so brute force, not good. This is impractical. especially when I have more than 6 vendors. So what we actually ended up doing is we came up with some routing heuristics that says, if you're okay with not the most efficient or the most private solution, I can provide you some heuristics that actually gives you guarantees on the privacy and the efficiency. I'm not going to go through these in detail. They're in the paper. But so here's all the reasons, right? Geography complicates things. Finding an optimal route is TSP. It'd be hard, not great. Heuristics can at least guide you in terms of planning. And there's some technical notes, but I won't. They're not too important. One heuristic is the KL split. Don't worry about what that means. All you need to worry about is the fact that there is a formula that lets you compute exactly the maximum worst case privacy, the worst case privacy and the average privacy. This is another one. Again, doesn't matter. There's a formula that lets you compute exactly the worst case privacy and the max privacy. And you can, of course, compute the efficiency for any of these as well. And then this one is my favorite, but it's also the nastiest in terms of the equation. But this one is a heuristic we came up with that tries to mimic the drone, trying to keep it as full as possible. That's why we call it C stuffing. We're trying to stuff it up to the capacity C. Right? And it turns out there's actually a closed form formula for the for the max case privacy, it's trivial because it's just the worst case 1 over C. The average took the grad student a little bit of massaging, but we got it. Anyway, so the takeaway story here is you can have guarantees on your privacy factor. And if I plot them here, you see that the heuristics actually, a lot of them tend to lie on the parameter, which is very nice. I have no proof of this. I have no proof as to why they should lie. Empirically, we observe that they do. I think if you held a gun to my head, I could probably give you a reason why this is always going to be private optimal, but I don't know for the rest. It's open problem as to why they actually give reasonably okay solutions with respect to the private factor. I put way too many animations in this. Sorry. Anyways, okay. Takeaways, they work decently well. They save you on computation. Excellent. This is somewhat unsatisfying. I'd actually really like a vehicle routing problem with privacy concerns. Right, that's what I would really want. That's what we do. So, concluding remarks. So, summary, we have this very insidious privacy risk. We defined this probabilistic notion of privacy. We looked at how orders impact this privacy risk. We looked at this trade-off and the effects of geography. So all good and dandy. I'll let you absorb this slide real quick while I take a quick sip of water. So, what are some current and ongoing works? Does anyone even care about this notion of privacy? And this one I've already mentioned. Can we have a private vehicle routing problem? So, to answer the first one, we ran a large-scale survey of US customers. Long story short, they do kind of care, although you need to keep in mind this is a stated preference survey. This is not a revealed preference survey. These deliveries don't exist right now, so these are of course, by definition, stated preference. We're writing this up. This actually, all of the survey results are publicly available on GitHub. You can use that data. Please use the data. Cite us, but please use the data. And there's a lot of interesting nuggets in there that we haven't uncovered. We were using this for a very specific purpose, that is, obtain the value of privacy in dollars and in wait times. Because now I can tell a company, hey, you're going to try to solve this vehicle routing problem, but maybe you're okay sacrificing efficiency if I can increase your revenue by $2 because customers are willing to pay no more than $2 for privacy. So that's what we did here. So this is a really intriguing piece of work where we took the vanilla vehicle routing problem, which some of y'all might know. The way to solve those, you kind of take it's very easy to write down, right? Minimize summation ij, cij, xij, subject to inflow, outflow, balance constraints, and subject to coverage of all the nodes, right? It's easy to write it down, extremely hard to solve. You can actually get a quasi-polynomial-ish time by doing MTZ type Tor eliminations, sub-Tor eliminations. And that's what we kind of took advantage of. And we actually decomposed the problem into 3 separate subproblems where we first optimize over a class of route families, and then within each family we optimize the actual order, and then that gives us a set of, that essentially lets us cut down on the feasible space of this VRP problem, and we can solve a privacy constrained VRP problem. So this is actually both papers. Nope, come back. Both papers are in review. Happy to share preprints for either paper if anyone is interested. The flavor of this work is much more surveys, discrete choice, multinomial logit type models. The flavor of this work is much more integer programming, vehicle routing problems, large-scale combinatorial programs type stuff. So that kind of have separate flavors, but they kind of rejoin because this bullet here feeds into my objective weights for this problem. Okay, so I'm going to end on this slide here. So this is the list of the papers that I went through, with the last 2 being preprints because they're in review, but I'm happy to share them. And these are the first 3 that I talked about. Sorry, I kind of rushed on parts 1 and 2, but I did want to kind of get to the privacy question. So with that, my email is there. My lab's website is there as well. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you again for being such a captive audience. And yeah, thanks again for having me, and I'm happy to take questions and have some discussion. Thank you.
I think a lot of you want to ask questions or have some, share your idea of it. So feel free to raise your hand. Fatima 오잖아. For you. Fatima, okay.
That was quite interesting to me. Thank you. And I've got 2 questions. You told that the company will use the cost, time, privacy, maximize the privacy and the capacity and something, and you put some in your constraint, right? And not an objective function. How do you weight them?
So the way to weight them, well, you can do it. You can do some sensitivities and try a range of values, but we wanted to weigh them just with whatever we found through our survey results.
Right. And how about the objective? Is it a multi-objective problem or just?
Yeah, that's a great question. So each of these problems, so each of these subproblems have its own objective. So the master problem is multi-objective, but each individual problem is single objective.
Thank you. And one more question.
Yeah.
You give the route to the trajectory, give a trajectory to the customers, right? Each S and USS, right?
Are you talking about part 2 or part 3?
Part 2. You give a route trajectory to each USS. And does they do they give you a feedback about the routes? And sometimes they might say, oh, the route is broken or something, and give us a new trajectory.
Yeah, that's a great question. USS, if you think of them from a private entity perspective, they want to be good stewards of the airspace they govern, right? So let's say if they're bad customer service, then maybe, or if they overcharge you for flight fees, maybe you don't want to fly through them, right? So it would probably be in their best interest to offer some sort of routing feedback, right? Particularly if they own an airspace that has a lot of hotspots.
Is there any way to give them, at the first time, give them the best way, not to give a lot of feedbacks? for example, solve a problem with some reinforcement learning, deep learning or something? Is there?
If your company was the only company flying in the city, right? But if you have if you have competitors who don't share their information with you, it's a partial information gain, right? So that's a little bit trickier. You can certainly optimize within your own fleet, but at the moment, I don't see how to do it if you don't know what other people are doing.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for your question.
Thank you for your great presentation. And my name is Hyun Jun, I'm the PhD student of Department of Mobility. And I have a question about the privacy. Sometimes like you show us was very simple case, and it looks like only for special private customers, like who own, usually most of the people using ground vehicle delivery, and your case looks like for some special customers who can pay for drone service. And if this drone delivery will be popularized, I think, and in that case, their system will be very similar like current delivery service. Like they don't send their some kinds of things, their like food or some kind of things by vendors to customers, but it'll be looks like they gather all things in a hub, and City A hub to City C hub, then City C hub sent to customers, and that will be very all their items will be mixed. And I think in that case the probability will be very very small than you showed in that slide. And is it still still have to consider about the privacy case?
That is an excellent question. We consider door-to-door data, right? So certainly if you do hub-to-hub, you get some free aggregation, right? Because you've aggregated your order on a hub level. So, and actually similarly, if you deliver to like an Amazon Locker type service, you also probably get some free privacy aggregations there too. So our threat model here is door-to-door delivery with remote ID. So certainly, for fleet operators that don't operate in that kind of service topology, the privacy question is much less severe in that case. It's really for door-to-door. Thank you. Hello.
I can just. Hello, my name is Tae-ho, and I would like to ask about, are you considering to do, like, you just said your system is door-to-door system, so do you consider all the types of cargo using drone delivery? Because sometimes, like the food, the time is very important. If it takes like 30 minutes or more than 1 hour to deliver then I think the food quality is get worse. So the time is very important. It depends on what types of cargo you deliver. So do you consider this kind of things in your research?
Yeah, excellent question. So in the preprint, we consider time constraints as well. So we have a time window of when you must make a delivery for food that might go bad. In our survey, we actually ask people same question, but we change the type of item. So we say takeout food versus prescription medication versus alcohol. The value of privacy increases between takeout food and alcohol. Kind of expected. Again, stated preference, so you kind of grain of salt there. But we indeed do take into account type of food in the survey, and we take into account time constraints for in this preprint, which is in heavy issue. So, yes. Basically, I don't have time to go over that. Is the survey.
Hi, Professor Lee. Thank you for your talk. I have a question regarding this problem, private beacon routing problem. I think there are 3 problems, optimization problems you gotta solve, and I think you're doing it in a sequential manner. And I was wondering which one is the most difficult to solve in terms of, say, computational time out of these 3.
It's a great question. I want to say, I don't remember. I want to say the one that's actually the most difficult is the first part, because the first part actually has the constraints from these 2. It's just, yeah. So I think the first part is the hardest because it is actually a severely constrained BRP. And a good rule of thumb is the more constraints you put on things, it tends to make it worse. But I think the last step is the most annoying to solve. I don't think we did a computational complexity analysis of this, so I don't know the answer to that. But my guess would be the print part, because it has constraints from the other 2.
Right, and just one more. I think this is more, at this point, this is suitable for offline planning. Do you have any plans to extend it for online purposes?
I would like to. I tend to work a little bit more at the strategic level, but like I said in part 1, there's interesting nuances in the trajectory optimization part 2, right? So certainly, just because, let's say I solve this VRP, I still need to fly it, right? Like I just have a sequence of origin destinations. I still need to fly. So if you want to complicate this even more, you could potentially look at a stochastic version where the stochasticity would be coming from variances in how you do your trajectory optimization, misspecification in your model, etc., winds, uncertainties, environment, blah, blah, blah. So you could take into account some of that at the strategic level, but you would probably have to couple this with a low-level trajectory optimization.
Thank you.
Sorry, she the first. Sorry.
Thank you for your talk. I have a question about, is there any hidden preferences that you want to take into account, like, visually appealing of the rules? So something is important for the clients to have these kind of things in mind, but you don't know, but you know that there are some hidden preferences that they don't tell you at first steps. Is there anything like this?
Honestly, currently privacy is a hidden preference from my perspective. I think if I had ever worked at Amazon, I could probably answer that question a little bit better. I'm sure there are hidden preferences. Whether or not they're tractable to incorporate into the model is a different question.
And so you know that they may change some routes, or they use them as you give them?
In practice, you would do some dynamic routing.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Jimmy Choi, and my question is that you are choosing the privacy as the important factor in community integration about the AAM, then in door-to-door delivery. When about the case of the hub-to-hub delivery, what do you think is the important factor other than privacy?
Noise. That tends to be a big one. Noise tends to be a big one. Perceptions of safety, like carrying a giant thing. Oh my God, what if it's going to drop it on my kid, right? That tends to be a big one as well. Those are usually the big 2 that people study, noise and safety perceptions. But yeah, those I agree with you. I think those would be bigger issues in the hub-to-hub case.
Hello, my name is Kamila. I was very impressed with today's lecture. Thank you. I have a question about UAS traffic management part. Every airport have lots of constraints. I think the most important part of constraint is obstacle limitation surface that define the airspace around aerodromes to be maintained free from obstacles. So I think so I wonder if OBS obstacle as OBS aircraft takeoff direction has been applied to loot extraction.
Yeah, great question. That part was very strategic, so I didn't really think about the trajectory at all. In practice, well, these vertical takeoff ports are generally just up-down, but you would have to like incorporate helicopter routes, and I was talking to a colleague who was doing some UAM studies for Seoul. You have to take into account like the ILS glide scope for Gimpo, right? If you wanted to do urban air taxi between downtown Seoul and Incheon, and you have to be careful about that. Right? But in part two, it was at such a strategic level, I don't look at the trajectories at all.
Thank you.
I have a very small short question, and then I want to share my impression to everyone as a professor here. So my first question is, how do you want to define privacy in UAM, which is for delivering human, not things? So what is the best? How do you want to define it? Like in that way, in the beautiful mathematical way.
I think since you're already being tracked on your phone, there's already a privacy leak just from your phone GPS, right? I would actually go back to some of the privacy in connected and autonomous surface vehicles, because there's actually there's a really good piece of work actually also done by. Sorry, I keep turning this off for no reason. There's a really good piece of work. Oh gosh. Listen to this click for a little bit. I'm almost there, I think. I just need to go back to like slide 50. Oh, this one. Sorry, that was a lot of work for like just showing his face, but I think it's important to see what he does. Karthik has done a really good piece of work with this group at Stanford that looks at doing differentially private, cryptologically secure, connected autonomous vehicle routing. I would look into something like that because in our privacy question, I was never worried about the position, right? I'm not going to hide the position from you. That ruins the purpose of the safety criticalness. What I do want to hide from you is like guessing what I ordered. But in your question, you actually do maybe want to hide the position a little bit. Maybe you don't want people to know that you took a trip from point A to point B in the city or something. Then I think the literature that's actually closest to would be some of the privacy literature for GPS tracking and for surface vehicle tracking, which is actually so different from this case that we actually couldn't use anything from it. Which is why, I don't like to work hard, right? I don't like to have to come up with a new model, but we had to because nothing else worked. Right? I would be happy to borrow some of the really great work that's already been done for surface vehicles and for GPS traces on your phone, but it just didn't align with the situation at all because in none of the others, just like my GPS, my phone tracks my location, but it's not necessarily a safety feature, right? Like it's not, they're not using my location to make sure I don't bump into another person, right? But that's not the case in here, right? So I think, and for your question, I would certainly appeal to some of those works, one of which is by Dr. Gopalakrishnan.
Okay, thank you very much. And then to my student and then everyone attending here, I just want to share my impression after seeing this presentation. The genius thing he did, in my opinion, is that the research question arises from one word, privacy, and then he defined what is the privacy in mathematical way, in engineering way, and then he formulated the problem by his own self. So a lot of people start solving some problems and then want to like improve the methodology and then solve how to solve solution. But he actually made a new question. Right? So making new question is the creative and the unique thing that only the top level research can do. So I encourage you to make your own research question. Which can be accepted by a lot of people and who want to solve this problem easily. Okay, so I think this is really impressive to me. So I want you to get some motivation in that way. This is what I want to say. Any other question?
He's too nice. I'm like embarrassed. But thank you. That was very nice.
One more question? No?
Thank you for sharing your nice work. And I have one short question. So is there any possibility for observers to infer the items, types of items based on time consumed to drop the items? Like, for example, if a customer orders some fragile item, then drone will take more time to drop the item to home than, for example, for the worst case, there is the crazy people who like to crash the fragile item. Then he saw the items delivered from the drone, and oh, there will be a fragile items. And I want to crash that. Then is there any possibility to?
Yeah, no, actually that's a great question, because let me scroll now that I know how to work this. Okay, so I'm going to answer your question, I think, in the reverse. One, I would highly encourage everyone, if you're interested, go look at this data set, because we gave everyone like a free response, and more than one person said, if I ever see a drone delivering packages near me, I will shoot it down. This is for you. Say with a grain of salt. Yeah. So it's definitely not out of the question that like there are legitimate safety risks of how long or how short amount of time you take. Again, in part 3, we were focused on a very high-level question. We were saying, can I give you a routing that is privacy preserving? You can, of course, start adding realism to this, right? You can say, okay, the drone travels at variable speed. Okay, the drone has endurance constraints. The drone needs to take 2 minutes to lower its package down for this kind of package, and 3 minutes. You can, of course, add all of those in. We kind of wanted to, we wanted to give the structure of what we're doing first, but you can certainly add any of those in when you, for example, run your vehicle routing problem, right? The trade-off becomes how much more do you want to stuff in the vehicle routing problem versus just having it solved and then going to a low-level trajectory planner and then doing some more nuanced physically real modeling on the trajectory problem. Right? The trajectory problem, yeah, it's not linear, but it's usually solved. You know, throw an NPC at it, throw whatever at it, you can get a decent solution. VRP is like one of the most annoying, combinatorially hard things. So we actually, like, I think one of our philosophies was like we wanted to try to change this as little as possible. So it becomes a trade-off of like how much more do you want to make the VRP do versus just putting it into some, getting a solution here and then adjusting it again. Thanks for the question.
If there's no question, you can do. Don't be shy. As long as, even if I said the studio was the last one, but yes.
Okay, thank you for the presentation. And I wondered, you said there are many USS, many different private companies, and when I first heard them, they are their own competitors, right? So I wonder that they need to share their information to solve that vehicle routing problem. So I wonder the sharing their information
information is possible, or it can be another problem?
Yeah, that's a good question. So first, I just want to clarify, we were solving the UAS traffic management problem, which is not as bad as the vehicle routing problem. It's actually it boils down to a mixed integer linear program, so it's nice. Certainly. So let's say the government tomorrow says you need to share every single piece of information you have. You don't need to worry about distributed UTM anymore, right? Because you can just solve a centralized problem. Or let's say the government says you can only share safety critical information, then you would only share the like the feasibilities and the constraints that really matter to you, right? So in some sense, our model tries to fit a portion of the spectrum dependent on what the actual regulation tends to be, right? If the regulation forces you to share everything, that's just a centralized traffic management problem. If it tells you you can only share critical, I mean, you're never going to get a regulation that says you can't share anything, right? Because then the system doesn't work. Or like everything's confined just within your local region. But if you can only share minimal information, the question is, what do you need to share, right? And I mean, again, as I also emphasized in part 2, it's a really bad heuristic, right? Like it works, but it's not great, right? There's a lot of improvements that can be done in terms of doing smart things about like which region to solve first, or which, how to use, or like the form through which you actually pass the constraints and the infeasibilities, right? Lots of improvements there, but we just wanted to show kind of a proof of concept for a distributed UTM with limited information sharing.
Okay, we could add one more question. To make the first the AAM in the network, I think we need a lot of cost. So for example, the operating or some installation cost. And so should the government intervene that system, such as the subsidize or just the private company can make that system?
Yeah, that's a great mechanism design question, right? So like, do you do congestion pricing? We all know issues with congestion pricing. Do you do an auction-based allocation of the airspace? We know mathematically some of these auctions, like second price / Vickery, Groves-esque auctions, are really beautiful mathematically, but they also have their own sets of issues. Where do the funds go? How, who uses this? How do you manage the airspace? The honest answer is, because this is not a real system yet, it kind of takes a real system to operate and see what gets broken to know what needs to be fixed, right? So that's why when you look at the AAM literature, there's a good set of solutions for every single, well, most good set of solutions for like traffic management, right? People have proposed congestion pricing based. In fact, we have a recent paper in SciTech that does a multi-agent reinforcement learning to learn a congestion pricing scheme, right? So people have done congestion pricing, people have done auction-based mechanisms, people have done administrative optimizations of the strategic management of the capacities, right? I don't know what the actual regulations will be, and furthermore, it'll be different in the US versus Korea versus in Europe, right? It's going to be different as well. So it's not a one-size-fits-all solution, right? And you'll see this if you look at the air traffic management literature today, right? Europe tends to have airspace bottlenecks, but their airports are really good because they have airport slot constraints, so they do really good strategic demand management on their airports. In the US, we have very little airspace congestion, but all of our congestions are at the airport because we're a little bit more free market based, right? And our opinion is if the airline wants to schedule a departure and arrival at my airport, they should be able to, right? So just from there, you already see regional differences, which means the solutions for traffic management, et cetera, is going to be different for US versus Europe versus Asia versus other parts of the country. So it's a very unsatisfying answer because I basically said, I don't know, and I don't know until something actually goes wrong, right? Or like some issues happen. But that's also what's kind of nice about this field, this current area, because there's a lot of room for structured creativity if you make reasonable assumptions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Not yet. Factory for question. Right? Okay, then let's give a